Hey there and welcome back to another Disney video. And today I want to wind the clock back about a decade or so and talk a little bit about Frozen. Frozen. Now that was a revolutionary movie, wasn't it? And once again, I have to admit that like the foolish teenager I was, I also came late to the Frozen party thinking, an animated film about princesses? I think not. I wouldn't have been caught dead seeing this film. And of course, even after the film caught fire and the soundtrack was literally everywhere to the point that even I was humming it around school, I still stubbornly stuck to my guns and refused to watch it. But I do have to say, I wasn't the only smooth brain sitting around talking about how this film is not going to be all that good. Because a lot of critics and industry analysts were not all that sold on the potential of this film before it released. There were those that said it wouldn't be able to get mass appeal because it looked like it was heavily skewed towards girls and wouldn't be able to crack the boy market. That it would be a Wreck-It Ralph level movie in terms of its commercial success, perhaps grossing somewhere between $500 to $600 million. Maybe a little more, maybe a little less. And oh boy, I can't imagine making such a bold prediction and then being so deeply and horrifically wrong. And it is kind of funny because this is the opinion of professional analysts, their perception of it all. And I feel like this kind of shows how out of touch they can be. Because this film went absolutely nuts. It earned a total of $1.28 billion across all markets, with particular emphasis on the USA and Japan, and became the highest grossing animated film of all time, a position it held for 6 years. And it was also a smash hit from a critical perspective, sitting pretty on a healthy 90% approval rate on Rotten Tomatoes, as well as winning 2 Oscars, 4 Annies, a BAFTA, a Golden Globe, 2 Grammys, just to name a few. And I mean, there's numerous others that they were awarded as well. So I think it's pretty safe to say that this film really did change the game for animated entertainment. Hell, I'd even argue that its legacy extends to Frozen 2, which would eventually go on to surpass its gross at $1.4 billion internationally. And whilst it was an all-around quite popular film, it didn't really reach that same cultural high that the original seemed to hit. And the critical response was a lot more measured. Which to me indicates that the success of this film largely rests on the shoulders of Frozen 1. Yeah, the film was good and did well for itself, but without the original film to create that legacy and develop a pre-made fan base, it wouldn't have done as well and probably would have been shot down to perhaps Moana levels at the box office. Still a really great gross, but not one of the greatest of all time. Unlike Frozen 1, which obviously earned its spot on its own. And so that's really what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about the legacy of Frozen, and what makes it so good, and how it seems to have carved out its own place in the pantheon of Disney classics to become arguably the most prominent film by Disney animated studios of all time, and certainly kickstarted one of the most lucrative franchises in Disney history. And honestly, there are a number of reasons that I think Frozen did so well, but one of the biggest is that it felt a little bit like a throwback. It felt like it was a love letter to the previous eras of Disney filmmaking. For a long time during the 2000s, it felt like Disney had lost the magic, and in many ways it felt like there was no connecting factor between the movies. Like they were throwing ideas and concepts and styles at the wall to try and see what would stick, to try and see what they could do to reignite their popularity again, and make Disney Animated Studios the #1 studio in the animation game. And then, by the late 2000s, early 2010s, we started to see them find that Disney magic that it seemed like they'd lost. We got promising films like The Princess and the Frog and Tangled, and suddenly Disney was cool again. They were doing well. They weren't seen as the awkward, cringy studio next to the Chad Pixar. And then we hit Frozen in 2013, and everything clicked at once. For some people, the film felt like a throwback to the bygone golden era days of Walt Disney, where everything felt fantastical and magical. Films like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Cinderella. It had that storybook feeling. But at the same time, it also brought back memories of the Disney Renaissance, of films like The Lion King, Aladdin, The Little Mermaid, films that really inspired a whole generation. So on one hand, it played off people's nostalgia to sell tickets and get people talking about it. It made people remember their own childhood and therefore linked that sentimental attachment to this film, whilst also being able to modernize its style and content to make it more palatable to a modernized audience, revamping gender roles, love interests, and acts of true love, as well as changing up the formula for what makes a villain. It just really fired on all cylinders. But let's dig a little deeper into that. We'll start with the revamp of characters. In traditional Disney princess storytelling, the role of women is pretty well defined. They have little agency in the narrative and are there to be love interests, a goal for the manly and brave hero to aspire to. And we see this a lot in the early Disney films, and even quite a bit in the Renaissance. Ariel thirsts hard after Eric. Her whole story is about trying to get him. Jasmine's whole storyline is about finding a man that suits her, and she's also pretty highly sexualized for a kids' film in my opinion. Belle is kidnapped and falls in love with her captor, whilst also having the village brute vying for her hand in marriage, whilst the movie desperately tries to tell us that she's not like other girls. Quasimodo, Frollo, and Phoebus. They all fall in love with Esmeralda because she's so irresistible. A big part of Hercules is about his love for Meg. Same with Tarzan and Jane. At least Mulan mostly subverts these expectations for women to simply be the attainable love interest who in the end must be saved or protected. But Frozen outright says, screw that, and completely redefines everything about these dynamics. Instead of becoming the bitter, generic evil villain, Elsa is actually the tragic hero of the story. Anna, instead of being the damsel in distress, is the bold adventurer who wants to rescue her sister and save the kingdom, whilst also getting a boyfriend along the way. Kristoff isn't the hero, he's the sidekick. And the hunky love interest who would normally be the one to save the day, well, whoopsie, because turns out Hans is actually a power-hungry gold digger who just wants the throne and nothing else. Instead of the storyline revolving around accepting romantic love and that being what saves the day in the end, it focuses more on the love of a sister, a family love. And it's an interesting subversion, and one that I think a lot of people can connect with. But even beyond these redefined roles, I feel like another simple truth is that the characters were just ridiculously relatable, especially the sisters, with an even more particular emphasis on Elsa. Her struggles to come into terms with who she actually is and letting go of her fear of being different is one of the more relatable storylines that Disney's ever produced. And Anna, I don't know, she just oozes relatability as well. Kind of weird, kind of dorky, but with a lot of heart. She's pretty much the everyman type of character. Anybody can see themselves in her, no matter who they are. Kristoff, he's a very nice man. I mean, that is his whole character. He's a very nice man. Just some random peasant raised by trolls who works hard and tries his best. Olaf's one of the funniest Disney sidekicks of all time, and I will fight anyone that says otherwise. He truly steals every scene he's in, and I'd argue that at least in Frozen 1, none of his jokes miss. And honestly, I think that the final element that really elevates this film to the top of the leaderboard in terms of Disney franchises is that on top of all these subverted tropes and relatable characters, the soundtrack. The soundtrack. It's perhaps the most iconic thing Disney's ever made. Do you want to build a snowman? For the first time in forever? Let It Go? In Summer? Classic! Seriously, these songs just get stuck in your head. Even now, just writing those words, I can hear Kristen Bell's voice. But regardless, this is what I mean. The film became ubiquitous because of the soundtrack. It was everywhere. People wanted to sing along. Everyone knows where the songs are from. Everyone knows the words. And of course, kids became rabid and obsessive about watching this film and listening to the songs over and over and over and buying literally all the merch. Simply put, this is how legends are born. And really, that's all I have to say for this video. And so these have been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think about Frozen and its legacy? Do you agree it's pretty much the pinnacle of Disney at this point, even if it has become a little bit overplayed? Or do you disagree with my thoughts completely? I'm curious to read what you have to say, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.